That's adorable, he chuckled, sliding my pitch deck across the glossy mahogany table without even glancing at it. The room went quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the soft hum of the AC. I stood there in my best navy suit, watching his executives smirk and exchange glances as if I'd walked into the wrong room. "You've got 5 minutes left," he added, sipping his espresso, eyes locked on his phone. The boardroom at Carson Dynamics was everything mine wasn't. Sleek, towering windows, leather chairs, a skyline view. I had rehearsed this pitch 100 times, polished every slide, every word. And now, Richard Carson, the CEO I once admired, was laughing at it like a toddler's crayon drawing. I swallowed hard. "Thank you for your time," I said, voice calm, heart fractured. "My name is Ethan Cole, and if you told me 5 years ago that I'd one day stand in the same boardroom as Richard Carson, founder of Carson Dynamics, I would have laughed, maybe even blushed at the idea. But that laugh, that smirk on his face during my pitch, I'd carry that with me for a long time. Let me take you back. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a modest 2-bedroom home with peeling wallpaper and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. My father? Long gone by the time I turned 9. The only male figure I ever looked up to was my granddad, Walter, a retired Army mechanic who taught me to build things with my hands and never take shortcuts in life. When I was 16, I built my first prototype, a foldable solar panel for hiking gear. It barely powered a flashlight, but I remember the look in Grandpa Walt's eyes when I showed it to him. "You've got something special here, Ethan. Not in your hands, in your head." That line stuck with me. I was the kind of kid who took apart toys just to see how they worked. While others saved up for iPhones, I bought circuit boards off eBay and spent nights soldering wires under a desk lamp. By the time I hit 25, I had a mechanical engineering degree from Ohio State, 3 failed startups under my belt, and a relentless drive to build something that mattered. Pulseband was born during one of those long caffeine-fueled nights in a shared apartment in Cincinnati. It was a wearable health band, but unlike the Fitbits out there, this one detected microchanges in body temp and sweat pH to alert wearers to oncoming fevers, fatigue, or even anxiety spikes. I wasn't trying to create the next Apple Watch. I wanted to save lives. Grandpa Walt had collapsed in his garage a few years earlier from heat stroke. He never made it to the hospital. Maybe if he had something like Pulseband. So I poured everything into it. And I mean everything. I sold my car, maxed out my last 2 credit cards, ate instant ramen for a year. My girlfriend, Melanie, left me saying she couldn't be with someone who bet his life on a wristband. I didn't blame her. Still, I kept building. By the end of year 2, I had a working prototype and a small team of misfits just as hungry and broke as I was. We called ourselves the Garage Rats. There was Logan, a coding genius with a man bun and a coffee addiction. Priya, a data analyst who quit a corporate job in Chicago to do something that actually matters. And Jay, my best friend since freshman year, who handled operations and cracked jokes just to keep our spirits up. We worked in my uncle's abandoned auto shop, sleeping in shifts on bean bags and using the old office fridge for our Red Bulls and frozen burritos. But we had something. A real shot. Our beta testers, mostly nurses, delivery drivers, and factory workers, started reporting amazing results. One guy even claimed the Pulseband helped him avoid a seizure by giving him an early spike warning. The local press picked it up. Then a regional podcast. And then came the invitation, a pitch slot at Midwest Founders Expo in Chicago. Carson Dynamics was the headline sponsor. When I saw Richard Carson would be attending, I almost didn't apply. He was a legend. The man had turned a $15,000 startup loan into a $400 million wearable tech empire. I'd watched his YouTube interviews like gospel. His words were carved in my notebooks. Ideas are nothing. Execution is everything. And now, I'd have a shot to pitch him? I spent 2 weeks perfecting that 10-minute deck. I studied his past investments, read his bio, even learned his coffee order, double espresso, no sugar. We arrived in Chicago 2 days early. Logan got us matching hoodies with our logo stitched on. Priya triple-checked the data sheets. Jay rehearsed my Q&A section with fake investor accents. We were nervous but excited. The night before the pitch, I pulled out a crumpled photo of Grandpa Walt from my wallet. I whispered, "Tomorrow's for you." But I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. 10 minutes into the presentation, Richard Carson leaned back, chuckled, and dismissed the whole thing like it was a kid's science fair project. Not a single question. Not one note. Just a condescending laugh. Even after we stepped out, Jay tried to cheer me up. "Maybe he's just having a bad day," he said. But it wasn't just a bad day. It was a reminder of everything I wasn't. No matter how far I'd come, to a guy like Carson, I was still just a garage kid with a dream too big for his boots. For weeks after, I replayed that moment like a loop in my head. That laugh. That room. That look. But what he didn't know was that I didn't come from nothing just to be laughed off the stage. I would rise. And one day, he would regret underestimating me. 3 months passed. After the pitch disaster, I went dark, off social media, no newsletters, no press updates. The garage rats went back to the shadows. Not out of shame, out of strategy. That laugh from Carson didn't kill my spirit. It focused it. I told the team we weren't chasing investors anymore. No more begging to be understood by men like Richard Carson. If they couldn't see our vision, we'd bring it to life ourselves. We launched a pre-order campaign. We targeted nurses, truckers, firefighters, warehouse workers. Real people who needed real-time health insights. The result? 17,000 pre-orders in 38 days. That was our first wildfire. I poured every dollar into refining pulse band, added sweat sensor diagnostics, Bluetooth sync, a fall detection trigger. Priya ran health data analytics with a fire in her eyes I'd never seen before. Jay negotiated a licensing partnership with a small Midwest logistics company for exclusive fleet usage. But behind the scenes, I was doing something else. Something no one saw coming. I started digging into Carson Dynamics. At first, it was petty curiosity, wanting to know how their stock was doing, how many patents they owned. Then I found something interesting, a subsidiary called Dynatech Labs, located in Kansas City. It held some of Carson's intellectual property, mostly legacy tech that was now outdated, but what caught my eye was a failed product line, PulseTrack, their version of a health tracker. It flopped 3 years ago, buried quietly in a Q3 report. But here's what hit me. They still own the rights to a biometric sensor algorithm I was using because I had unknowingly replicated it from old white papers in the public domain. That meant my pulse band, as innovative as it was, could be challenged on IP grounds, unless I got ahead of it. I hired a lawyer, Danielle Mercer, Harvard Law, sharp as a scalpel and zero tolerance for ego. She reviewed everything and said, "You're playing with a lit match next to a fuel tank. But if we do this right, you could own the fire." Over the next 60 days, I worked with Danielle and a secret investor group, a few angel backers from Silicon Valley who were sick of Carson's chokehold on wearable tech. We made an offer, buy Dynatech Labs and all associated IP for $2.2 million. Carson didn't even blink. It was a loss center for him. He sold it. He had no idea I was behind the purchase. I now legally owned the rights to the biometric tech his own PulseTrack failed to launch. And more importantly, I now had grounds to challenge his next product line if it even resembled PulseBand. But I didn't stop there. 3 weeks later, I filed a patent application for PulseBand's software-hardware integration under my name, now protected by the very IP I had just acquired. Carson's legal team didn't even see it coming. Then came the twist that made headlines in the health tech space. I received a notice that Carson Dynamics was seeking new funding after 2 major retailers pulled back from their upcoming wearable launch. Their stock dipped 9%. Their R&D team was downsizing. This was my moment. I reached out to one of their mid-level shareholders, a guy named Tobias Granger, who was frustrated with Carson's direction. He introduced me to 3 more internal shareholders, all ready to offload their stakes to cut losses. Within 3 weeks, my team, under a quiet LLC called Slate Ridge Holdings, acquired 22% of Carson Dynamics. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jay, until the board meeting invite came in. It was addressed to Mr. Ethan Cole, minority stakeholder. I showed up in the same Navy suit Carson had seen me in that day, ironed, fitted, and looking a hell of a lot more expensive now. He didn't recognize me at first. He was too busy yelling at his CFO over sluggish forecasts. But when I sat down across from him, unfolded the meeting agenda, and leaned in with a calm smile, "Before we begin," I said, sliding a familiar blue folder across the table, "you might want to take a look at this." He frowned, opened it, read the first few lines. His face drained. It was the official acquisition paperwork. Dynatech Labs. All IP assets. All rights. And the line at the bottom. Sold to Ethan Cole. For a second, no one spoke. Then I added, "And this," I placed a patent certificate next to it, "covers PulseBand, which means any overlap in your upcoming series is a problem." Carson looked at me like I had risen from the dead. "You little entrepreneur." I cut in, still smiling. "Now a stakeholder. And legally, your competitor." You could hear a pin drop in that glass tower. The man who laughed at my pitch was now holding paperwork signed with my name. Carson didn't slam the folder shut. He left it open. His eyes darted between the patent seal, the acquisition clause, and my name, written neatly in ink. Not desperation. He leaned back slowly, arms crossed. "So this is your big moment," he muttered, cool but tight in the jaw. "You pulled some backdoor deals and want to gloat?" "Not at all," I said. "This is business. I'm just here to make sure we all understand what's on the table before anyone makes a move they can't take back." His voice turned sharp. "You blindsided my board. You manipulated asset trades, you." "I followed every law, every clause. Check with your own lawyers." I gestured toward Danielle, seated silently behind me, a single brow raised. Carson looked around the room, expecting backup. But the CFO, Jonathan Fields, avoided his eyes. So did Tobias Granger, now seated to my left, the very shareholder who helped us get in. Then came the anger. "You're being difficult. This was a trash product we offloaded. You're wasting your time on revenge." "You mean the same trash product your new Vantage Band was modeled after?" I replied calmly. "You know it. I know it. And if we push this into litigation, so will your investors." His face tightened. Behind that fury, I saw it. Fear. Real, quiet fear. "You think this is about pride?" I continued. "You humiliated a builder in front of a room full of suits. And now the builder owns the blueprints." He stood. "This isn't over." "Actually," I said, standing with him, voice quiet but firm. "That depends on how you handle what comes next." A tense silence lingered. And then he walked out, pushing past Tobias. The meeting broke into murmurs. But I wasn't finished. Later that evening, I got a call. It was Michelle Carson, Richard's younger sister, and the company's former COO. She had resigned 2 years earlier due to philosophical differences. Turns out, she'd been following PulseBand's progress from a distance. "I saw the board minutes," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to challenge him." We met 2 days later at a quiet rooftop bar overlooking downtown Seattle. She wore a soft blue blazer and spoke like someone who had witnessed years of egos collapse behind polished doors. "He's always thought he was untouchable," she told me. "But what you did, that was surgical." I wasn't sure if it was praise or warning. But Michelle wasn't there to reminisce. She wanted in. "Let me help you stabilize the back end. If you're planning to scale PulseBand, you're going to need someone who knows how to navigate compliance and operations at a Fortune 500 level." She laid out a proposal. Join our team, not as a consultant, but as a partner. With equity. Jay, Priya, and Logan weren't sold at first. Trust came hard after years of bootstrapping and betrayal. But Michelle brought something else with her, a shift in momentum. She knew Carson's supplier chains. She had personal relationships with 3 of his top 5 regional distributors. And she had a file, internal complaints, harassment cases, pending lawsuits that would ruin him if they ever leaked. I didn't want to play dirty. But I was learning that staying clean didn't mean staying silent. 1 week later, Carson launched Vantage Band 2.0. On launch day, we filed a cease and desist. The complaint went public. Headlines flared. "Startup fires back. Pulse band versus Carson Dynamics heats up. Patent war brews in wearable tech industry. Richard's team tried to discredit us. An online campaign painted Pulse band as unsafe, untested, emotionally reactive tech. But here's the thing. We had data. We had thousands of user reviews, beta reports, FDA compliance progress reports. And thanks to Priya, we had predictive analytics showing Pulse band outperformed Vantage band by 23% in stress detection accuracy. Even former Carson Dynamics employees started reaching out. One by one, they'd whisper. He never cared about the mission, only domination. He once said, let them collapse. We'll build an app to replace them. About EMTs. We wanted to innovate. He wanted monopoly. It was a storm, and we stood in the eye of it. A month later, Carson called for an emergency vote to revoke my board rights. I showed up early to the meeting. I wore the same hoodie I'd worn with the garage rats in our Cincinnati workshop. No suit, just the original Pulse band stitched on my chest like armor. He was waiting. This time, there was no smile, just eyes full of venom. You're tearing down something I built, he hissed. You built a cage, I said. We're just opening the windows. The room fell quiet. Michelle entered. Her eyes met mine. She took her seat next to me, not behind me. And then the final blow came. Tobias, his once loyal investor, stood and said, Richard, the board has voted. Effective immediately, your executive powers are suspended, pending investigation. What? He snapped. You can't. We can, Tobias replied. And we did. The shareholders have lost confidence. He tried to protest. Bang fists. Shout. Threaten legal action. But the walls were closing in, and I didn't lift a finger. After the meeting, I stepped out into the cool air. Jay was waiting across the street, holding 2 coffees. Did it happen? He asked. It's done, I said. How's it feel? I paused, looking up at the glass tower. Lighter. Like I finally set something down I didn't know I was carrying. The next morning, I didn't check the stock market. I didn't open my inbox or skim the headlines or ask Jay for a status update. Instead, I went back to Columbus, to the garage where it all began. The place was dusty, filled with echoes, the hum of a soldering iron, the laughter of long nights, Logan's ridiculous playlist bouncing off the walls, Jay's jokes when our prototypes caught fire, literally, and Priya's deep sighs as she begged the code to compile. I sat on the floor, back against a crate marked prototype number 01. The original Pulse band. Bulky. Ugly. Unfinished. But it was ours. I thought about Grandpa Walt. I hadn't visited his grave in almost a year. Life had been moving too fast, too hot. So I went. I cleaned the edges of his headstone with my sleeve, placed a fresh set of carnations, and knelt. You were right, old man, I whispered. It wasn't in my hands. It was in my head and my heart. I told him everything. The pitch. The laughter. The revenge. The moment I flipped the boardroom on its head. And then I said something I hadn't said in a long time. I'm tired. Because I was. Not with the work. Never with the work, but with the weight of proving I belonged. Of proving I was worthy. That I deserved to be in the room. That I was more than the garage kid, or the broke founder, or the guy who got laughed at. I had built something beautiful, but revenge had been the scaffolding. Now, it was time to build something real. Back in Seattle, things started to shift. Michelle transitioned from advisor to chief operating officer of Pulse band. She brought in compliance experts, operations staff, even a logistics manager from her old network. We moved out of the borrowed warehouse and into a repurposed community center downtown. Open concept floors, plants, dogs under desks, and a standing invitation for local students to tour and learn. The Garage Rats weren't just a team anymore. We were a movement. We launched a grand initiative to distribute Pulse bands to underserved workers, janitors, delivery drivers, factory employees. People who were always overlooked, never prioritized by big tech. Priya partnered with a nonprofit to develop mental health algorithms, using biometric patterns to detect early signs of burnout and anxiety in caregivers. Logan, burned out but still brilliant, took a 3-month break and came back with a wearable interface that could sync with emergency response teams. Jay finally got his moment too. He pitched an idea for PulseBand's expansion into elder care, subtle alerts that could notify family members if grandma's vitals shifted overnight. He called it Project Walt. I almost cried when he told me, "We funded it. Fully." Meanwhile, Richard Carson? He faded. Tried to launch a podcast. It flopped. Tried to get funding for a new venture. No one bit. People remembered. Not the scandal but the arrogance. He'd spent too long building walls instead of bridges. And when those walls crumbled, he had nowhere to go. I didn't dance on his downfall. I didn't need to. In fact, a few weeks after the board voted him out, I asked Michelle if she thought we should offer him something. "You mean hire him?" She blinked. "No. Just closure. Maybe a conversation. A coffee. Something." She smiled. "That's the difference between you two. He would have burned you down. You're offering him a bench in the shade." We didn't reach out, but the option stayed open. Because healing isn't about forgetting what they did. It's about choosing who you want to be. We hosted our first public product forum 3 months later. Open doors, no NDAs, just real people giving real feedback. An EMT from Oregon stood up, tears in her eyes. PulseBand helped me get through the worst 48 hours of my life. I was working triple shifts during the wildfire evacuations. I almost collapsed from dehydration, but the alert saved me. The room stood still, and in that moment, all the pain, all the mockery, the boardroom humiliation, the sleepless nights, the credit card debt, the cold ramen, it was worth it. One night, Jay and I were walking home after a late dinner with the team. "You ever gonna let it go?" he asked. "Let what go?" The laugh. Carson's face. That boardroom. I thought for a second. "I already did," I said. "I just didn't realize it until now." He grinned, took a sip of his soda. "Then we're finally free." And we were. Because revenge had fueled the climb. But love was what would keep us building. 6 months later, the old Carson Dynamics building had a new name on its glass doors. PulseWorks HQ. The board had officially approved our acquisition of the remaining stake after a merger agreement was finalized. Our quiet LLC had slowly, methodically, bought out the pieces, and now we weren't just renting a seat at the table. We owned the table. The place had changed. What used to be a fortress of cold steel, silent corridors, and closed-door meetings was now filled with light, community murals, and open spaces. There was a food truck every Friday. Dog bowls near the door. Local students from nearby tech programs dropped in for internships. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a heartbeat, real, pulsing, evolving. On the 3rd floor, we built a wellness wing, complete with meditation rooms, nap pods, and an emergency child care area. Michelle led the charge, calling it Revenge by Healing. Priya launched a mentorship program for underrepresented women in data science. Logan started teaching AI architecture in weekend classes. Jay became head of culture and employee growth, his idea, of course, and organized community hikes every other Saturday. Even Tobias Granger, now retired, sent us a letter. "Thank you for reminding me what it's like to believe in people instead of numbers." One morning, while walking through the new R&D lab, I saw a framed photo on the wall. It was black and white. A younger me, barely 24, soldering a chip on the PulseBand 1.0 inside the Cincinnati garage. Someone, probably Michelle, had written a quote under it. They laughed, so he listened harder. I just stood there for a while, smiling. In October, we hosted the first Pulse Impact Summit, a public event celebrating health tech innovations, small creators, and survivor stories. Hundreds came. One speaker, an ex-coal miner named George, told us how PulseBand helped him detect early signs of black lung syndrome. He hadn't been to a doctor in 5 years. But because of our device, he caught it early and started treatment. His wife cried through the entire talk. At the end, he looked straight at me and said, "You don't know how many people like me you've saved, son. You just don't." I couldn't speak. Jay had to take the mic. Afterwards, I slipped out for some air. I found myself by a garden weed planted near the main entrance, flowers, herbs, and a small memorial stone with the initials WC. Walter Cole.
Grandpa.
I sat beside it, picked a rosemary sprig, and closed my eyes. You told me to build with my head, I whispered. But the world needed me to build with my heart too. On the anniversary of the boardroom showdown, Carson sent a letter. Not a threat, not a plea, just a short handwritten note. You built something real.
And I didn't see it.
That's on me. I hope you go further than I ever did.
RC.
I didn't reply, but I kept it. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what growth looked like, both his and mine. Now, every Monday morning, I walk into Pulseworks HQ through the back door, not the front. Old habits. I pass the lobby where employees gather for breakfast, pause by the wall of success stories, photos, letters, testimonials. And then I go to the prototype room. I spend the first hour of every week there. Just building, tinkering, listening to what's next. Because while revenge gave me power, purpose gave me peace. And that peace? It was louder than his laugh ever was. A team lunch. Sunlight floods the cafeteria. The air smells like garlic knots and fresh basil. Logan's arguing with a software intern over code indentation. Priya is reviewing pitch decks with a new hire. Michelle's on the phone, half laughing, half threatening a supplier into dropping their rates. Jay walks over with a huge grin and a folded piece of paper. Want to see something cool? I open it. It's a rough sketch of a next-gen wearable, smaller, smarter, solar-powered. Let's call it Pulse Zero, he says. Fresh start. Clean name. I stare at it, smile wide. Let's build it. We all raise our glasses, iced coffee, kombucha, ginger ale. To progress.
To people.
To pulse. And to never letting the past define your future.